Hello and welcome to week 2 of the new leader boot camp. We are so thrilled that you are here and we are excited about today's topic. So, if this is your first time joining us, no worries. We'll catch you up. You're not late or lost or any of that. You can head on over to the newleaderbootcamp.com to get registered, also to get caught up in case you missed week 1. All of the details are there about how to get connected and how to get reminders. We are on for this 5-week challenge with you to help you to prepare to be the leader that you know that you can be. And maybe you don't know it yet, but we want to help you to see it so that you can be it. So we are on every Tuesday of this month. So every Tuesday in June from 11 to 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, 12 to 1 Eastern. And we're tackling some topics that are essential for leading today, right? And so one of those topics that we're going to be diving into today is how do you lead through uncertainty? So how do you lead through change? How do you navigate change management? And really guide your team with confidence. And so I'm so excited to be joined here with my colleague. But first, before we introduce ourselves and get into it, why are we even talking about this topic? Well, I used to work for an organization, and we'll introduce ourselves a little bit in a second here. But they used to tell us, and I think it's so true, that now, like the current pace of your work experience, right, is as slow as things will ever be. And I remember when that kind of first started to become like the line for helping us to really embrace the speed of change. I used to think, well, certainly like we can't sustain this. Like certainly, we're just going through some, a transformation, or this new technology is launching, or whatever the change was that was happening. And then we'll get over the hump and things will die down. But inevitably, we got over the hump and there was something else, right? And that's really for 4 main reasons. One, the needs of customers are changing. And so the evolving needs of the marketplace demand that technology advances, demands that the way that business go about solving problems shifts. And so organizations will need to adapt. And I believe, and Tatiana, you could probably speak to this too, but when I reflect on my experience as a corporate leader and my experience now as a founder and an entrepreneur that works with corporations, I see that so much more clearly now as a business owner when it comes to how flexible you have to be with adapting to change, because the business model from 2020 is not the business model that we're running with right now. And so I have such I feel like a deeper appreciation for a lot of the things that I heard when I was an employee at a corporation versus now being a founder of one. It's just a different perspective on what this actually means. The second reason why change is inevitable is because the landscape is more competitive. So technology really makes it more seamless nowadays to get into the marketplace, or even for organizations who are already established, for them to shift their business model faster, or to learn new ways to solve customer problems and challenges. So being able to innovate, being able to embrace new ways and new strategies for creating solutions, delivering solutions is paramount. The third is organizational growth. So when we're thinking about your organization, right? When you're thinking about what you've experienced over the last 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, right? Organizations are growing, and you might be thinking, well, actually, we just had layoffs. We're not growing, right? And so that could speak to, again, growth in a different kind of way, in terms of how the business is growing and how the business, again, change, needs to adapt in terms of its headcount to facilitate solutions maybe in a new sector or area of the business, or dialing up or dialing down certain divisions. And then last but not least, I've spoken to this really in all of them, but technology advances, specifically artificial intelligence, AI, will demand that we continue to change. So this topic is really always relevant, but I don't know that there has ever been a time where it's more important than right now, when we are so early in, far along, but still early in the infancy of how AI will change the way that we live, the way that we work, and thus the way that we do business, right? The way that we solve customer problems. And so as that becomes more of a staple in the workplace, it will require that we get more flexible with change. So here's our agenda for today. Here's how we're going to be approaching today. And if you are joining us live or on the replay, make sure you drop in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from and what you're looking forward to taking away from today. So we're going to walk through some introductions. I mentioned that if this is your first time joining us, we're excited that you're here. We're going to talk about the stages of change, some of the foundations of change management. There's so many exceptional change management models that are out there. We lean on the Cotter change model a lot. They're one theory, but also organization that really leads in this space. So there are a lot of different models out there. We're going to talk through some of the foundations of change management today, and then some tips for you as a leader on communication and leading your team through change. So my name is Brittany Cole, thrilled to be here with you. I believe that every experience is an opportunity for continuous improvement. So you being here today, you joining us speaks to that mission and commitment as well. I spent about 12 years at Pfizer in the sales and marketing roles, and did DEI work there, diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And that work, the culture work inside of an organization as well, really helped me to understand that it's one thing to build a business and have incredible products, services, and solutions. It's something completely different to ensure that the people that are delivering those or that are innovating around those are working in an environment where they believe they belong, where they can truly thrive. And so Career Thrivers, we are a leadership development firm, and our sweet spot is talent retention and development. So we work with corporations, Fortune 500s that you know of, from Amazon to UPS to Bridgestone to Caterpillar, helping those executives and leaders really think about how they are retaining women and how they are retaining diverse talent and how they are equipping their leaders, their managers, right, to lead well. And so that's the work that we get to do. And I'm excited to be here with Tatiana. She's going to introduce herself and share a little bit more about her background and the work that she does, and then we will get into today's topic.
All right. Well, thank you, Brittany. I'm excited to continue the series. I think today's topic is going to be really helpful and beneficial for everyone here watching live or on the replay. So a little bit about me. My name is Tatiana, and I'm the CEO of T. O'Hara Consulting, where we primarily focus on the development of first-time people leaders to really help them find their unique leadership style, but also creating more structure in their day-to-day so that they can lead effectively, right, and reach their fullest potential as leaders. I studied at Kennesaw State University and have a graduate or a bachelor's degree in hospitality management, but I'm actually studying for my master's now at the University of Georgia in learning leadership and organizational development. And a little bit about my background. So I was a district manager for Aldi. It's a German grocery store that came over to the United States several years ago. And we basically took this very rigid, primarily focused on efficiency-based business model and brought it over to the States, where we now need customer service and, we need nice aesthetic designs and whatnot. And so, during my tenure there, I learned a lot about not just how to lead people, but how to have really strong company culture without compromising operational results and efficiencies, right? And so that has really helped me to build the foundations of my leadership development company and have been able to support hundreds of business owners in their endeavors as leaders. So I'm excited to be here with you today, and let's get started. All right, so we would love for you guys to introduce yourselves. So whether you're watching live or here on the replay.
Yep, so feel free to drop into the comment section, tell us your name, your role, and then what is one thing that you're hoping to get from the conversation today. So drop that in the chat for us, whether you are watching live or if you're watching this back on the replay right here on LinkedIn. We want to hear from you. What is one thing that you are looking forward to learning, or you are looking forward to working on or improving when it comes to change management? This is really where the chat, right? And we all know this. I feel like we're veterans in this space for the last 4 years now. But the comment section, the chat section, is where we get to cultivate community. If we were all in the room together, we get to go around and hear from a few people. But The comment section is really where we get to do that online. And so we look forward to getting to learn more about you and invite you to use that comment section to also connect with others who are here as well. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about, just to kind of set the scene a little bit, the stages of change. So when we're talking about the stages of change, really taking a step back to understand how we as humans, generally speaking, process change. So the first thing that typically happens when a change is coming, especially one that we expect to be disruptive in some sort of way, or one that might require us to really find a new way of being or a new way of doing things, is denial, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the resource. It's coming top of mind right now, but the book, Who Moved My Cheese? It is a very quick read. It's not a thick book at all, but it's one that I highly encourage leaders to check out for helping you to see the way that these stages of change show up in not only yourself, but also in other people, right? So denial is usually first. We're usually reluctant to acknowledge the need for change, right? We want to stick to the way that things have been happening. Excuse me. We usually want to figure out a way, maybe, can we tweak the status quo, or, how can we keep what we have or as much as we have, right? So denial is usually first. Then the second stage is resistance, right? So one, we are usually reluctant to acknowledging that there is even a need for change. And then two, we're typically resistant, right? So there's opposition. We're apprehensive. We don't know if we should make the change or if this is the best time to make the change. And then the third phase, right, is exploration. This is where we're open to discovering and understanding the benefits of change. And you might be saying, well, Brittany, I'm in an organization where I'm not at the executive leadership table. So, these stages don't really impact me, but actually they do. If you think back, right? And I'm thinking for a second on an example, probably an example that we could probably all relate to that's still very relevant right now is, are we working in the office or are we working remotely? Right? So that is a topic around change that most organizations have or are still working through, right? And initially there was reluctance, like, do we even need to change what we're doing? And I think we got over that one probably pretty quickly, the denial phase, right? Especially early in 2020, right? And even some in 2021, it's like, okay, it's very clear that social distancing is required. So we are not going to be able to work, across the room from one another. But then there was some resistance, right? All of these proposed changes started coming out. Well, are we indefinitely working remotely? Are we working remotely a few days a week? Are we, deciding on days to come in so we have that FaceTime together, right? And then that resistance turns into exploration, where you have many larger corporations who sought out consulting firms or organizations like Tatiana's in mind to say, hey, help us to think through how we can navigate a new way of working in this current environment, right? So that's just one example of how the stages of change show up, and then how you as a leader have to facilitate that, which we'll get into in just a second. So I'm going to bring Tatiana back up to tell us more about the importance of change management during these moments.
Yes, absolutely. So I think the first thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the importance of change management is when we as leaders don't feel equipped, right? When we don't feel like we have the tools to manage change, this is where a lot of the pieces of the puzzle can start to fall apart, right? Because our team is kind of counting on us to lead us through that change. So it's important that as new leaders specifically, that you have resources and support around this, right? Because the more that you can learn and develop and become more confident in your ability to lead through change, the better, because naturally, obviously, as you practice, as you go through different changes, you're going to get better, you're going to evolve. But I think having that foundational knowledge is really important as well. So I think that's what you guys are going to gain from today's conversation. So change management, what is it exactly, right? So first of all, it is basically the process of helping individuals and teams navigate through different types of changes. Now, this can be on one end of the spectrum or the other, right? We can be talking as small as we're rolling out a new program, or we're switching softwares, or we are changing the way that we have our team meetings, all the way to we're having massive department changes. We're in the process of layoffs, right? So I think a lot of times when we think change management, our mind likely goes to like those big things like layoffs, but we are managing change daily as leaders, right? And so as a first-time leader, you play a lot of major roles in the success of these changes. So obviously the communication piece, a lot of times, especially if you're a first-time leader, you're likely not, in the C-suite, right? So you're probably that person in the middle, right? You're the person who's hearing the change from up top, and you now have to communicate it to those that report to you, right? So you're communicating change. You're also supporting your team members through this change. So that might mean making sure that they have what they need from a training and development perspective, making sure that they have what they need from an operations perspective. And then also ensuring smooth transition. I think that's the most important part of change management. I think when done well, we don't feel it as much, right? It doesn't feel like a major disruption in our day-to-day. Now, what can happen when change is done right? Well, obviously, we can really begin to build some stronger culture within the company. Our teams can start working better together and functioning better together. We can start to see more confidence in you, of course, as the leader. But then on the opposite end of that spectrum, what happens when change isn't done right? Lots of confusion, frustration from people that are affected by the change. Turnover is something that we tend to see when change is not done right. So it's really important that we start to think about these things, because it not only affects our day-to-day productivity, but it can really begin to affect the company as a whole. So some of the common challenges that we'll see in change management, and I was just trying to think through, like, what are some of the things that the people who are attending this live session might have struggled with. I thought back to even some of my own personal experiences. So the first one was lower level leaders often feel caught between executive decisions and team concerns, right? So maybe you hear your team, you understand what they're going through, and you want to side with them, but based on what you're being told, you kind of feel caught in the middle, right? And so it can be a hard spot to be in. Balancing transparency with confidentiality. So sometimes you may be privy to certain information pertaining to this change that you're not able to share with the team, right? So what do we do in that case? Pushback from the team. So when the team doesn't really understand the change, or when they don't feel like the change makes sense, or that it's actually going to benefit them in the long run, they may be pushing back, whether that be through, not being willing to do certain tasks. But pushback can also look like just a different type of demeanor in the office or in the virtual workplace. Struggling to get buy-in around new changes. So I think this is going to be the mark of a good leader as we navigate change, is our ability to create that buy-in. Typically, and we're going to talk about communication here in a second, but typically that buy-in is going to come from your ability to effectively communicate and get the team around the solution, right? To get them excited about the solution. And then lastly, I just said managing your own emotions around new changes while being a confident leader. So what if you're feeling uneasy about the change yourself, right? What if you don't feel like maybe this is the best decision for the company, or maybe the change affects you in a way that you can't yet communicate? So managing our own emotions around that can be challenging. But I would love to know in the chat if there are any challenges that you particularly have experienced in the realm of change management. So feel free to drop those in there. But just know that if you're experiencing any of these, you're not alone, right? It's not abnormal. These are some of the natural, I think, byproducts of going through change. But Brittany, do you have any challenges that maybe you've experienced in the past around change?
Yeah, I would definitely say the one that you mentioned around managing your own emotions around a new change while being a confident leader. That's a tough one, especially when you consider moments. Like, I can think of a couple of experiences where it took me some time to really wrap my mind around the change, especially agreeing with, and I think that's something that we don't talk about a lot, right? Especially when it's like, okay, I had no direct impact or influence on the decision that was made, but I'm responsible for implementing the decision throughout the organization. And that can be a really hard place to be in because it can almost feel like you're going against what you would have decided in that scenario. And that's really where you have to lean into the leadership really skill of managing your mindset. We talked about this a little bit last week, and really tapping into your purpose as the leader, right? And my purpose as the leader is not to only take action on what I agree with. My purpose as the leader of the organization is not to create resistance where I need to be helping to facilitate change. And so I've had to really work on that last one, right? In times where I'm like, how was this decision even made? Like, I feel the exact way that I assume my team is going to feel, but right, my role is to be a good steward of the decision, right? And being a steward of the decision doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with the decision, but because you have signed up, right? And I like to just give that visual because it's like, in most instances, you are raising your hand to be a people leader, or agreeing, even if you were tapped on the shoulder, that yes, I want to take on this responsibility. And that's a responsibility not only to yourself, and your increased salary and increased responsibility, right? But also it's an increased responsibility to the team and to the organization. And so part of that stewardship comes in with working through how you feel about the decision that's being made, and knowing how to filter that through how you need to best communicate the change so that you are moving the process forward and not becoming an obstacle in the process. And we'll talk a little bit about communication tips here in just a few minutes. What about you, Tatiana? How would have been some challenges for you?
Yeah, I would say honestly, I kind of want to echo that sentiment. Being in the store environment. So the way my role worked as a district manager is I did not go to like the corporate office. I went to my stores. I would just rotate my 5 stores throughout the week and visit each one a couple times. And so I was very much like on the ground, like I was seeing the work that my managers were doing. And so when these difficult changes would come down that I knew were going to make their job so much harder, and I personally even couldn't see the short or long-term benefit of the change. It just seemed like something that was hindering the managers that already work so hard. It was really challenging for me to sometimes get on board with those things and to relay them effectively. And so I think throughout my tenure, I had to learn like this balance of protecting the interest of the company, but also being supportive to my managers and making sure that they have what they need to succeed. And I think like when you can kind of pull that veil back a little bit, and have that level of vulnerability with your managers within the, I guess, within the parameters of your limitations as a leader, I think that's the sweet spot, right? Where your managers know, like, hey, you understand where I'm coming from, but you also understand that we have to get this done. So how do we do this in the best way, with the least amount of resistance possible? So yeah, I think that was honestly like probably the hardest part of being a new leader, being a young 20 something leading managers that are more than twice my age and having to explain to them, hey, we have to do this. I know we don't want to, but like we have to. So like, how can we get this done as easy as possible?
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's a big one. And make sure that you stick around for week 5. You want to register at the newleaderbootcamp.com for that, because one thing that we'll touch on for week 5 is there is a leadership framework called 360 leadership that becomes so critical in this area of change management, because what I think oftentimes new people leaders don't recognize is that you are in a critical role for implementing change management across an organization, right? Like, we're talking about, how do you manage your own emotions, because the change usually comes from the top, but it is absolutely facilitated through the middle, right? If people leaders are not on board, if people leaders are not active in implementing the change, it does not happen effectively. So your role as a cultivator of the culture that you want to maintain as change is happening becomes so critical. And so one of the things that becomes paramount for you as a leader, especially a new leader, to learn how to do is to not only lead across or to lead your direct reports, but also to manage up, right? And so how do you then filter the feedback that you're getting, some of your own emotional thoughts or insights from the customer, or you being boots on the ground, which we'll talk about that as well, which is so critical, right? The visibility of a leader during change is really important. But how do you then take that information and then share that back up, right? How do you ensure that not only your leader, but your leader's leader, et cetera, that they're getting that intelligence that you have, right? Being the boots on the ground, so that it can help them in the process of delivering the change. So I love what I'm seeing in the chat. You all are lighting it up. Y'all are back for week 2. I love hearing it. It sounds like Who Moved My Cheese? Yes, I love that. I start new HR team meetings with the Who Moved My Cheese video. Yes, it is such a great resource. And I love this insight as well, balancing being a safe space for employees to share feedback and to vent frustrations versus execs believing they should know everything employees share and who said it. Yeah, that's so critical. And you're exactly right. COVID was a lesson in managing personal feelings versus business decisions. And that's critical. And I kind of hinted at that a little bit in my intro. I think one of the blessings in this current phase of my career is being able to think back and have a different appreciation and understanding for strategic decision making at the executive level, now that I'm having to make those decisions for our business. And so it's a different, really appreciation for how do you make critical decisions that will impact not only you, but the business, the customers you serve, the communities that are impacted by your work, and the team members that are part of your organization, knowing that everyone's not going to love the decision, but you need to make the best decision for the values and mission and purpose of the company. And so we'll talk about that. That'll come up again in communication, because that's really important when it comes to communicating change. So loving the conversation here. So how do you empower your team through transition? Well, one is to provide, really that should say education. So really helping your team, equipping them with the skills, with the knowledge to know how to be flexible and to know how to move through the change, how to adapt. Also fostering collaboration. So what are ways that you can, as people might be taking on more responsibilities or more tasks that are connected to managing the change, right? How do you encourage open communication, open dialogue during that time? Again, much like was shared, I love this comment around, sharing feedback and also providing that space to vent frustration as well. So, right, that communication and teamwork part becomes really important for empowering your team. And then acknowledgement. So recognizing the effort of your team members individually, right? And that's really where some of the tenets that we talked about in week 1 come into play, of you really understanding the needs of each individual team member. Some team members will appreciate the team meeting recognition in front of everyone. Some team members will be like, I can't believe they just did that, right? And so really knowing what acknowledgement and recognition looks like for your people, and being able to share that and to acknowledge how they are demonstrating resilience and flexibility and accountability and adaptability, and ensuring that that is a consistent part of how you are. It's literally a part of your change management strategy, is a great way to empower your team as the transition is happening.
Yeah, so let's talk about some strategies for change communication. And honestly, these strategies really apply to just communication in general, but specifically as we're navigating through change, right? So clear and transparent communication is the key, honestly. So one thing that I think every leader should do when they are in the midst of change is you need to do your best to understand this change to the fullest. You need to understand when the change is taking place, how it affects your team, how it affects the greater organization, what your role is, what your team's role is in that change, Just really thinking through all of those small details. And sometimes when we receive that communication about the change, we might not receive all of those elements, but it's our job as those leaders in the middle, right? Because we have that close contact with our direct reports, you can begin to think, how would they receive this information, right? If I was hearing this information as, let's say you're managing a team of general managers, if I'm managing a GM, like what is a GM going to be thinking? What are they going to want to know? What are they going to need to know? And so when you have all the information, it's easier for you to then communicate. Now, don't get me wrong, there might be some information that's not yet available, right? There might be some information that you don't have the ability to get your hands on. So we want to get what we can and lead with that, right? And it's important to be honest about what you do and don't know. I think a great answer is, I'm not sure, but I can find out for you. Let me get more information. And I think if you can show the team that, even though you don't know everything, that you are willing to figure things out with them, that makes them feel less alone versus, hey, I'm not sure, figure it out, right? We already talked about understanding all angles of the change, but just really putting yourselves in the shoes of the people who will receive this information. I think that's going to really help you more times than once. Using multiple channels to keep everyone informed. So apply this how you see fit or how it works within the business model that you work within. But sometimes we just get like a little email blast, right? Like some sort of corporate communication, but we might need to get other channels involved as well. I love having, a good face-to-face meeting or on Zoom meeting if you work in a virtual setting. But to make sure that everyone is on the same page, and to be able to get everyone involved in the solution as well. We can also use this communication as a tool to create more of that buy-in that we talk about so much. And we're going to continue to talk about buy-in, because the more that you get buy-in from your team as a leader, the easier your job becomes, right? It's a lot easier to lead a team that isn't resisting, right? When the team wants to go where you go, it's a lot easier to get the result and to just have a really happy and thriving company culture. So we want to loop in our team on various topics where possible. And I think this is another good question to ask those that are initiating the change, right? Like what is okay to share and what's not okay to share. But the more you can kind of bring your team in, the better. And so an example of this, like let's say the solution is not yet set in stone, we can kind of talk with our team about how to collaborate to create one, right? So I'll just use an example from Aldi, but let's say that we are consistently scoring lower in our ring speeds, which is how quick our cashiers are checking out the groceries, and we hear word from the top that this is greatly affecting the business, and that we're going to be implementing a new program to help our cashiers ring faster. If it's not yet set in stone, then maybe we can collaborate with our team to see what can we contribute to the solution, right? And again, that just is going to help to create more of that buy-in. So those are just some of the strategies that you can kind of implement as you're navigating the communication involved with this change. Now, talking about emotional intelligence, right? So we want to use EQ to help us lead through change. So we talked about emotional intelligence a little bit last week, but thinking about emotional intelligence, really just being able to tap in and be in tune with our team on a different level, right? Being able to understand how they're feeling, what they may be thinking, that's going to help us to be able to navigate that change as well. So change management, regardless of, like I said, if it's something small, like a program being rolled out, or if it's something big, like the structure of your department is changing, always look at these things as an opportunity to develop your skills and your confidence as a leader, right? And so again, the more that you can begin to put yourselves in the shoes of the people who would be receiving that change, that's going to help you tap into that emotional intelligence as well. We want to stay adaptable, right? And be able to adjust our plans as needed. I think this is a really big one, because let's say, the change that was communicated to you, maybe it was pretty vague, right? Maybe it wasn't thought through all the way. Well, as you're kind of initiating this change with your team, or whatever that may look like within the realm of the change, we want to be adaptable, right? And be able to communicate back up to our leaders what we're seeing, how it's affecting the team, what changes may need to take place. So know that you do have a voice as a leader, right? And it is your job to communicate this change, but it's also your job to communicate back to your leaders, kind of like what Brittany was saying. And then lastly, just gaining understanding of your team's perspective and using that to power your communication. So again, the more we can become in tune, ask the right questions, have the right conversations, the easier it's going to be to understand what they might be going through.
So, how do you build resilience with your team and even within yourself during times of uncertainty? Well, first, it really comes down to, and I would say even really before agility, that self awareness becomes really critical. But you want to be able to, as a leader, develop the ability to be able to respond with empathy and then to make adjustments as changes are happening. So, an example of this might be that maybe you can't change the change that's happening, right? The decision has been made. You're responsible for facilitating it with your team, but maybe the agility comes in with how you decide to communicate that with your team members, right? Maybe you have your kind of all hands team meeting, but maybe before or after that, you're hitting people individually as well, right? So just being flexible in really, and this really boils down to emotional intelligence, knowing what your team needs to thrive through the change, right? And so it might look different than what another leader needs to do for their team. So you want to be able to tap into that. And then just embracing flexibility, having an open mind, being able to embrace, new approaches to getting to the same outcomes, and just being really flexible in how you are thinking about all of the possibilities that could be. And then last but not least, really fostering that optimism. So again, you want to acknowledge where your team is, right? How they're feeling, create that space and opportunity, but always anchor back on the purpose, anchor back on the broader mission so that your team doesn't really get wrapped around kind of in this spiraling loop of what they don't like about what's happening and losing sight of the purpose and mission for which they're there in the first place. And working in the formally working in the pharmaceutical industry, I can say, and it's probably much like most organizations, but things were always changing. And one of the things that would keep us really grounded when I was an employee at Pfizer was anchoring in on the customer, having truly having, excuse me, a customer centric mindset. One of the last CEOs while I was there started this red share campaign. And this is how like this was practically implemented, where as the leaders, we would be intentional, whether it was a 3-day sales meeting or 45-minute town hall, to have a red chair in the room, an empty chair with like a red chair cover, if we could find one, or a bow, or just something that was red to symbolize the patient. And there was this beautiful, visible, practical way to always keep the purpose out in front of us. So regardless of what the topic of conversation was, regardless of how deep in the spiral we were about, opening up the room and giving people space to share their thoughts on whatever change may have been happening, right? Eventually I knew in my line of sight that red chair was there, and at the right moment I'm going to bring everybody back around to why we're here in the first place. It's all about the patient, and how can we think about this change that's happening that might feel like it's happening to us through the lens of how this makes the business better for the patient. So again, that's just one example, but as a leader, right, how can you foster optimism by thinking about your own mindset, but then also how you're cultivating a growth mindset across your team to see the challenges as opportunities. So then what does this look like for the long term, right? And so the change is happening, right? We think, oh, we're going to get over this hurdle and things will be fine. But then how do you really sustain that change moving forward? Well, one, again, it goes back to the motto that I live by. My dad used to tell, I don't know if I've shared this on the series, but my dad used to tell my brothers and I that the biggest room in our house is the room for improvement. That's what he would tell us growing up. And that line just kind of stuck with me. And so sometimes I chuckle now doing the work that I do in leadership development. It's like it's all about learning and continuous improvement, but it's so critical, right? And it's so critical for sustaining change in the long term, right? So really being committed to how do we, yes, this change has happened. And as the leader, I need to be sure that I am creating a process by which we are reviewing and refining the process to optimize for performance, right? Ongoing, right? And what does that look like within your team to really have that long-term success? To adaptability, right? We've talked about the importance of flexibility. How do you ensure, one, that you are aware of the emerging trends, that you are aware of the challenges within your current market, and creating the space to adapt for those. And then thirdly, last but certainly not least, is employee engagement. So again, finding those ways to keep your team not only motivated, but invested in the change management initiatives that are happening, right? How they connect back. And I believe from a communication standpoint, oftentimes what is missed in the communication is how the change connects to the purpose, right, of the organization, and aligning the change to making the execution of the mission more effective, right? And so really understanding that, one, for yourself as a leader, because we often jump to, well, how is this going to impact me, right? And it goes back to those ways we talked about at the out front of the stages of change, right? That denial. And then we want to really, we kind of go internally to really think about, okay, like what role is this change going to have on what I'm experiencing every day, right? And sometimes there's some resistance around that because we assume it might have a negative impact on us, or it might create more work for us, or whatever the case might be. But we want to ensure that we are keeping, as leaders, the team engaged in how does this change impact the larger purpose? How does this change impact the bigger mission for why we're here and the business that we are moving forward? And you want to make sure that that level of communication is included really continuously, right? So not just a one-time communication of how the change impacts the purpose and mission, but making that a through line in each communication with your team, both written and oral. So again, we're going to be diving into more detail, providing resources for you, and sharing ways that you can continue to develop as a leader on week 5. So you want to make sure that you get registered at thenewleaderbootcamp.com. If you're watching this live on LinkedIn, this isn't it. We have some additional resources for you. So make sure you head on over and register at thenewleaderbootcamp.com. So we're going to come back as we wrap up here. We definitely want to hear from you if you have questions, if you have tips for change management, because we're not the only people on here, right, who have teams. You all are leading teams. You have shared some great tips with us already. So what would you add, excuse me, to this conversation around leading change? And Tatiana and I thought today that we would share a little bit just about our experience. I'll share one quick story. So I've talked a little bit about my transition from working inside of corporate to having corporations as clients and helping them with workforce and learning and development for talent retention. And I can remember right before I left Pfizer, I was in a people leader role, leading a sales team in Nashville. So I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. I'd moved back, been back about a year or so from our headquarters in New York doing marketing. I was leading this amazing, incredible sales team. We're the number one team in the district, had great performance, and there was an organizational restructure that was about to happen. And I do those quotes because that does usually mean, right, back to, why does change happen? A business need changes. And then usually if there's a change in business structure, then there's usually a change in the talent structure to help to facilitate that business. So that can oftentimes result in displacements, layoffs. So that was happening, and we all knew it, and it wasn't new to the industry at all. Anyone who, if you've worked in the pharmaceutical industry or you're familiar with it, it can sometimes be like every 18 months to 2 year kind of, in the back of your mind, there's going to be a restructure that happens. And even sometimes because of a business acquisition, we did talk about that, but that happens a lot as well. As your company acquires companies, the business needs change, and so the talent structure needs to change. So that was happening, excuse me, within the organization. And at the time that I'm leading this team, again, number one team in the district, so needing to maintain performance, which and this isn't a performance management workshop, but some leaders might say that getting to good performance, or excuse me, maintaining high performance is just as difficult as getting to high performance, right? So when you're in that number one spot, how do you keep it? And so we were focused in on that. We wanted to get that into the year, maintaining number one, winning the Tripped Awards, all the kind of incentives that came along with that, in addition to serving our customers, of course. And my team didn't know at that time that I was actually impacted by the restructure. So the role that I was in was going to be eliminated. I was technically on a layoff list. And I was going through this process of leading this team of 12 brilliant sales professionals, right? Much like Tatiana was sharing, showing up, making sure I'm visible, doing field rides, meeting customers, right? While at the same time, figuring out, okay, I have all these leaders calling me about these, my next career opportunity at the organization and these roles that are coming up, and what do I want to do, and where do I want to be, and do I want to stay in Nashville, or do we want to go back to New York? Having all these conversations, really kind of managing my own career development at the time. And I think so often as people leaders, sometimes if you aren't mindful and intentional, your own career development can kind of fall to the wayside, right? So as you are, and it's part of your role, right? Developing your team, right? The best leaders create more leaders. So as you're developing your people to be better, right? You also want to remember that you have a career development journey as well. So what does that development look like for you? So I'm juggling these two things. And I can remember in many of the conversations having to really cement my morning routine. And I would say that's the practical takeaway that I'll leave with you, because I knew on most of the field rides, I was heading into it, a few particular ones, right? I was heading into an emotional driven conversation because my team was in that early, denial resistance phase of this change. Well, why are we changing it? And I knew I had to really show up as a representative of the organization while also being mindful and empathetic of the needs of my team members that day. And so the only way that I was able to do that effectively was I had to first be in the right mindset around my own journey, right? That was very questionable at the time. And long story short, ended up taking the severance package. But even that, right, having an exit strategy and managing all of that was certainly a task. And so, again, it's very critical when you are leading the implementation of a change as a leader that you're mindful of your own, like you're self-aware is really what it is when it comes to emotional intelligence. You are aware about your own mental, emotional state, and then how to best communicate, right? And prepare. Like I would prepare for those field rides. I would know, hey, I'm having a field ride with this person. I know them enough to know these questions might come up, right? And I'm going into this, spending this day with them prepared to honestly answer these questions, but also anchoring them back on the purpose, ensuring that I'm supporting them in the work that they're doing, ensuring that I'm helping them to stay focused on the performance goals that we're after as a team so we can continue to maintain this top spot. What about you, Tatiana? What have been some of your experiences in this space with change management?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to say that was a great share. I feel like I resonate with a lot of those sentiments in my role at Aldi. So, the biggest change that comes to mind for me, so our district, there were, I want to say like 25 districts in the Jefferson division, which encompasses all of Georgia, some of North Carolina, some of South Carolina, and a little bit of Tennessee. And when I first started with the company, we were in one of the bottom performing districts, like as I was in training and I'm learning about my district. And so over the course of, I'd say about 2 years, we rose to the top. We were in like the top 3 districts of the division. And because of that, we got a lot more responsibility, because that's just how it works, right? When you're good at your job, you get more work. And so I managed 6 full store remodels during my tenure there. And so what that looked like is we would take these stores that were much older, and depending on the footprint of the store, we might be ripping out the flooring, the ceiling, getting all new shelving, new cooler units, new freezer units. And so the whole process took about 8 weeks. And so we had 2 weeks with the store open that we're working through construction, and then we would be closed for 6 weeks. And so I think in the beginning, the change was really exciting to my stores. They're like, wow, we're going to have an all new store. It's going to be so bright and sparkly. We were expanding some of our stores as well. Like, they were gaining some square footage. But it wasn't until we were in the midst of the change that they really started to hate it, because they saw how it was affecting their day to day. And so the first 2 weeks, right? And I apologize if it's a little loud in the background, but the first 2 weeks where the store was open, what that looks like is you come in and there's black garbage bags on the ceiling because the tiles have been ripped out. There's someone with a jackhammer in the back of the store, and we have customers through this time. We're expected to maintain the same sales volume during this time. And so our associates are having to not just do their regular jobs, but they're having to manage the emotions of our customers, right? Because they're a little frustrated. There's dust everywhere. It's not ideal conditions, but the company decided that it made more sense to make some money during these 2 weeks, and then when we really need to close the stores, we will. So then when it was time to close the stores for the 6 weeks, what that looks like is all of my staff would come in. We would have to package all the food up and either send it back to the warehouse to be distributed to other stores, or we would be shipping it directly to other stores. So that had its own, level of chaos. And then I would have to send my employees out to work at other stores. So now, instead of a 10-minute commute from their house to their home store, they're driving 30, 40 minutes to whatever store had the ability to take on team members. A lot of my team members' hours were cut during this 6 weeks because, you're getting sent to a store that really didn't need anyone, but they're taking you because they kind of have to, right? Our store managers, again, they're becoming really fatigued because they're being bombarded with questions, and the employees are just kind of dumping their feelings onto the store managers. And so it was a lot of moving parts. And in the midst of all this, I'm managing a team of contractors. I'm making sure that we're on track for our remodel. I'm doing all the marketing to prep for our grand reopening. I'm hiring an additional 20% of staff for each store to make sure that we can accommodate the new sales volume. So it's a lot going on. And so when I think about how did I manage through the change? Well, my first remodel did not go great. I will be honest, right? I was still kind of gaining my footing I think that was my first true experience with not just leadership, but project management too, 80 plates in the air and you got to make sure they all stay up, right? But as we navigated through our other remodels, once I was on my second, my third, my fourth, we really had a system down. And I think the things that made the difference is, one, I made sure that I understood everything. The first time around, there was so much information that I didn't know what I didn't know. And so people were asking me questions. I didn't know the answers. I was forgetting to get back to people because so many people were asking me things. So I made sure that I got all of the information up front, and I would have a really thorough meeting with the team to walk through, hey, this is what the next 8 weeks is going to look like. And then I had several touch points throughout. Two, I learned that, wow, this is quite an opportunity for my team to grow in their leadership. So as we navigated through the different remodels, I started having associates that were showing potential to be managers, right? Because I'm seeing how they're showing up for their team during this time. Also, I think just making sure that I was really good at communicating with my team as they were being dispersed in these different places. So Susie, Jimmy, and Bobby have been sent to a store an hour away. I'm calling them, I'm checking in on them, I'm seeing how things are going at their new store. Are they being treated right? So on and so forth. And then also I'm delegating. I think that's one thing we didn't really talk about in change is there can be so many things to do and you might not be able to do all of them, right? And so really enlisting the support of my store managers, right? As the store begun to close down and their workload started to decrease, how can I get my managers involved in this change? Again, creating that buy-in, getting them excited and wrapped into, the end goal of where we're going. And then finally, I think celebrating those wins and just celebrating our accomplishments. So at our grand reopening, of course, we're taking our team picture. Our store manager's cutting the ribbon with the big scissors. We're having a little party in the back room. I'm making sure to acknowledge every person's role in getting to this point. So not just, hey, good job, good work, but like, hey, I really appreciated this one thing that you did. This one thing made the big difference for us. So yeah, there's so much more to the story, right? Because it's really complex. There's a lot of layers to it. But I think just always continuing to refine my leadership, being a really good communicator, being a proactive communicator, not a reactive communicator. And then, just having honest support and celebration for the people that really helped us get to the finish line. So that's probably like my biggest change management story. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, no, that's so good. So many nuggets in that, and I think it just really cements how much of a privilege leadership is, and how it's not the shiny object that it can appear to be sometimes when you're listening to a leader. Be in the front and give the statement or lead the town hall. But at the very same time, the other flip side of that coin is it's not the scary, I don't want to deal with people place either, that sometimes you hear people, kind of give that tone to leading people, like, no, give me anything. I'd rather lead projects, or, I don't want to. It's like, well, actually, business gets done through the people. The asset with the greatest ROI in the organization is the people. So if you care about this business, if you care about these customers, if you care about the service that you're providing to solve this problem, to bring this solution to your customers, then being able to create an environment where people are being able to show up and be their best and do their best and get developed and be recognized, like, that is, I think of it as like the ultimate way of really serving and working, is to say, hey, how am I able to ensure that not only am I able to have a great work experience and be a phenomenal individual contributor and lead the sales ranking report and, make my merit bonus, or, all of the things that you can facilitate by your own work ethic or your own performance, but being able to bring that out of other people, I think is such it's a feeling that's almost really hard to describe. And I think that for some of us, right, that might be listening, that really do have the skill to be a great people leader, who really understand what it means to be empathetic, who are very capable of communicating in a way that brings the best out of other people. Some of us are shying away from stepping into that leadership role because we don't think we have what it takes, or we think it's too hard, or we think it's too difficult. And it's like, no, it's actually a privilege, and it's actually a phenomenal way to serve the purpose and mission of your organization. So if you have questions for us, make sure you reach out or drop them in the chat. We want to make sure that you join us next week. We are moving right along with this series, so we'll be right back here, same place, same time, talking about, and Tatiana hinted at this, but next week is all about delegation. So how do you move from micromanager, right, to empowered leader, mastering the art of delegation, time management, and energy management? We're going to talk a little bit about some phenomenal research around the importance of energy management. It's just as critical as time management, and we want you to be a part of that. So we're thrilled to see you next week. Make sure you head on over to the newleaderbootcamp.com to get registered for next week, to get the resources, and of course, to join us for a very, very special week 5 that you do not want to miss. And if you have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up, Tatiana?
Yeah, I think I just want to say that change management feels like one of those topics that's difficult to grasp until you're in it. And while I do agree with that, I think there are a lot of foundational things that we can instill in the beginning, right, to support you as you navigate through your first time going through some sort of change. So I hope that was this for you today. I hope that you can take away some of those foundational things around communication, creating buy-in, understanding your team's perspective, leveraging emotional intelligence, all of that. And then also, spoiler alert, next week is probably my favorite week. I love talking about delegation. So I think it's going to be a nice segue from, first talking about that mindset of a leader, now talking about how to manage through change. And now we're going to talk about like how to actually utilize the people around you, right? How to equip your team and empower your team to support you. So
cannot wait. So we'll see you right back here, same time, same place next Tuesday for the new Leader Bootcamp. See you then.